It was a normal day at home, the kind where nothing special happens. I was fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen, tools spread out, when I heard Laura talking on the phone. She was in the living room, laughing with her friends, and I didn't think much of it at first. The water dripped slow, and I tightened a nut, focusing on the job. The house was quiet otherwise, just the hum of the fridge and her voice carrying. I planned to grab a soda after, maybe watch TV, but her tone caught my ear. She sounded different, louder, freer, and I paused, wiping my hands on a rag. I decided to listen. Walking past the living room, I heard her say, "You won't believe him," and her friends giggled. I stopped by the door, pretending to check the mail, and leaned closer. The faucet could wait. I wanted to know what she meant. She laughed again. "His clothes are a mess," and I frowned, looking at my jeans, worn but clean. The house felt smaller, her words sharp, and I stayed quiet. My toolbox sat open, the wrench cold, and I held it, listening. She went on, and I figured it was just girl talk, but something told me to stay. Her conversation turned personal. She said, "He's such a mama's boy." And I stiffened. Mom helps sometimes, sure, but I'm my own man. The living room light spilled into the hall, and I saw her pacing, phone to her ear. I thought about our 7 years together, the dinners, the trips, and felt a twist. She added, "He can't earn enough." And I clenched a wrench. My job at the warehouse pays fine. The house was still, her voice cutting, and I stayed hidden. My soda plan faded. I just listened, the drip from the faucet a faint beat. She kept going. "He doesn't satisfy me," she said, laughing with her friends, and I froze. 7 years, and she never hinted at that. I thought back to her smiles, her "you're the best," and wondered what was real. She said, "His size is a joke," and the room spun, crude, personal, not like her. The house felt cold, her words a slap, and I gripped the wrench tighter. My warehouse job was steady, bills paid, but she made me sound worthless. I leaned against the wall, breathing slow, and decided to hear more. The toolbox waited, the faucet dripped, and I stayed put. I heard more insults. She said, "He can't talk to people," and I thought my co-workers, guys I get along with fine. She added, "He can't decide anything," and I remembered choosing our couch, our car. The living room was bright, her shadow moving, and I felt betrayed. 7 years, and she hid this? The house was silent except her voice, and I stayed by the door. My warehouse shift started soon, but I didn't move. She laughed. "I'm so unhappy," and it hit hard. Her "I love you" S were lies. The wrench felt heavy, the drip steady, and I waited, shocked. I thought about our life. We met at a friend's party, dated, married, 7 years of building a home. I fixed things, worked hard, and she seemed happy. The living room had our pictures, her smile in them, and I doubted it now. She said, "He's not enough," and I clenched my jaw. Enough to mortgage the food. The house felt like a stage, her act clear, and I stayed quiet. My warehouse job called. Tom needed me, but I ignored it. The faucet dripped, the toolbox opened, and I listened. Her friends agreed, dump him, and she paused, thinking. I held my breath, the truth sinking in. Her tone shifted. She said, "I want to try something," and my stomach dropped. Try what? The living room was warm, her voice low, and I leaned closer. She added, "No strings next week," and her friend said, "Do it." I stepped back, heart pounding. Next week? The house felt tight, her words a bomb, and I moved the kitchen. The faucet waited, the wrench in hand, and I stared at it. My warehouse shift loomed, but I didn't care. 7 years, and she planned this? The toolbox sat, the drip loud, and I decided to watch her. The truth was out, and I needed to know more. I planned my next step. That afternoon, I finished the faucet, the drip gone, and cleaned up. The living room was quiet, her call over, and she smiled. "Hey, good job." I nodded. "Thanks." My mind racing. The house felt off, her act back on, and I stayed calm. My warehouse job started soon. I drove there, the truck rumbling, and Tom asked, "Late start?" I said, "Yeah," focusing on work. The shift passed, orders filled, but I thought of her. The house waited, her secret growing, and I decided to follow her next week. The wrench was back in the box. The truth will wait, and I prepared for what's next. I stood by the door. Laura's words hit me like ice water. She laughed at her friends, saying, "His body's a joke," and I felt my face burn. 7 years together, and she mocked me like that? The living room was bright, her shadow moving, and I gripped the wrench tighter. She went on, "He can't satisfy me," her voice cruel, and I thought of our nights, her smiles, her hugs, all fake. The house felt small, her laughter cutting, and I stayed quiet. My warehouse job waited, but I couldn't move. The toolbox sat open, the faucet fixed, and I listened, shocked. She kept going. "His clothes are awful," she said, and I looked down. My shirt was old, sure, but clean. Her friends agreed, giggling, and she added, "He's a mama's boy." I clenched my jaw. Mom calls to check on me. That's all. The living room hummed with her voice, and I leaned against the wall, breathing hard. 7 years, and she hid this hate? The house was still, the fridge humming, and I felt betrayed. My warehouse shift started soon. Tom expected me, but I ignored it. The wrench felt heavy, the truth sinking, and I waited for more. She attacked my character. He can't talk to people, she said, and I thought of my coworkers, guys I joke with daily. She laughed. He can't decide anything, and I remembered picking our furniture, our vacations. The living room light spilled out, her pacing loud, and I stayed hidden. The house felt cold, her words a slap, and I gripped the wrench. My warehouse job paid the bills, but she made me sound useless. I thought of her, you're the best lies, and it hurt. The toolbox waited, the drip gone, and I listened, my mind racing. She hit my work. He doesn't earn enough, she said, and I froze. My warehouse paycheck covers us fine. Her friends chimed in, poor guy, and she sighed, I'm so unhappy. The living room was warm, her voice sharp, and I stepped back, heart pounding. 7 years, and she never said a word? The house felt like a trap, her act clear, and I stayed silent. My warehouse shift loomed, but I didn't care. The wrench sat in my hand, the truth heavy, and I thought of our life. The toolbox was neat, the kitchen quiet, and I felt lost. I remembered our past. We met at a party, dated, married, 7 years of building a home. I worked hard, fixed things, and she seemed content. The living room had our photos, her smile in them, and I doubted it now. She said, he's not enough. And I clenched my fists. Enough for the rent, the food. The house was still, her voice fading, and I moved to the kitchen. The faucet was done, the wrench back in box, and I stared at it. My warehouse job called, Tom texted, but I ignored it. The truth was out, and I felt numb. Her words replayed. Mama's boy, she said, and I thought of Mom's calls. Harmless advice. Can't satisfy, she laughed, and I remember her kisses. All lies. The living room was quiet now. Her call over, and I heard her footsteps. The house felt empty. Her hate clear, and I stayed by the sink. My warehouse shift started soon, but I sat down, head spinning. The toolbox waited, the kitchen clean, and I breathed slow. 7 years, and she felt this? The wrench lay still, the truth await, and I decided to watch her. I planned to stay alert. That afternoon, she walked in, smiling. Fix the sink? I nodded. Yeah. My voice flat. The house felt off, her act back, and I stayed calm. My warehouse job needed me. I drove there, the truck rumbling, and Tom asked, late again? I said, stuff at home, focusing on work. The shift passed, orders filled, but I thought of her. The house waited, her secret growing, and I decided to follow her. The wrench was back in the box, the truth burning, and I prepared for what's next. The kitchen was quiet, the past shifting, and I felt a change. I talked to Tom. At the warehouse, unloading boxes, I said, Laura's different. He nodded, heard that before. I asked, think she's hiding something? And he said, maybe. I drove home, the road dark, and found her on the couch, phone out. The house was still, her smile fake, and I sat with a soda, watching. My warehouse job held steady, paycheck's good, but her words echoed. The toolbox sat, the sink quiet, and I waited. The truth was out, and I needed to know more. The living room was warm, her act thin, and I stayed ready. I realized Laura's words were all lies after hearing that call. That morning, I sat at the kitchen table, the faucet quiet. Thinking about her, you're the best lines. She walked in, smiling. Morning, and I nodded, my mind on her mocking laugh. The house felt fake, her act thin, and I stayed quiet. My warehouse job started soon, but I lingered, sipping coffee. She said, I love you, and I forced a smile. 7 years of that, all a game. The living room had our photos, her fake grin in them, and I saw through it. The toolbox sat on the counter, the wrench still, and I waited. Her mask fell apart. I remembered her saying, I'm so happy, while laughing at my clothes and body with her friends. The kitchen was warm, the fridge humming, and I clenched my fist. 7 years, and she hid her hate? She made breakfast, eggs sizzling, and said, you work so hard, but I knew it was a lie. The house felt cold, her words echoing, and I stayed silent. My warehouse shift loomed. Tom needed me, but I sat, thinking. The toolbox waited, the sink fixed, and I felt betrayed. Her smile was a cover, and I saw it clearly. Then I heard the key part. That afternoon, she was on the phone again, voice low. Let's try it next week. No strings. My heart stopped. Try what? The living room was quiet, her pacing light, and I leaned by the door. Her friend said, do it, and she laughed. Okay, sounds good. The house felt tight, her plan clear, and I stepped back, breathing hard. My warehouse job called. Tom texted, but I ignored it. The toolbox sat, the wrench cold, and I knew something was up. 7 years, and she wanted this? The kitchen was still, the coffee bitter, and I decided to watch. I thought about our life. We built a home, shared bills, laughed together. 7 years of trust. The living room had our couch, picked by me, and I doubted it now. She said, "I love you," last night, but her call proved it false. The house was silent, her voice gone, and I sat with a soda, mind racing. My warehouse job paid fine, but her words, unhappy, unsatisfied, stung. The toolbox waited, the sink dry, and I felt lost. The photos mocked me, her smile a lie, and I stayed calm. The truth was out, and I needed to know more. I planned to follow her. That evening, she said, "Going out tomorrow," and I nodded, "Have fun." The house fell off, her act back, and I stayed quiet. My warehouse shift ended. Tom asked, "Late again?" And I said, "Yeah, driving home." The truck rumbled, my mind on next week. She smiled, "Missed you," but I saw through it. The living room was warm, her phone buzzing, and I watched her text. The toolbox sat, the wrench ready, and I decided to track her. The house was still, her secret growing, and I felt a shift. The kitchen was clean, the past changing, and I prepared. I talked to Tom. At the warehouse, unloading boxes, I said, "Laura's hiding something." He nodded, figured. I asked, "Think it's bad?" And he said, "Could be." The shift passed, orders filled, but I thought of her. The house waited, her call replaying, and I drove home, the road dark. She was on the couch, phone out, and I sat with the water, watching. My warehouse job held steady, paychecks good, but her words haunted me. The toolbox sat, the sink quiet, and I waited. The living room was still, her act thin, and I stayed ready. I checked our history. The next day, I looked at old photos, trips, dinners, her smiles. The kitchen was quiet, the fridge humming, and I doubted it all. She said, "Lunch soon," and I nodded, "Sure." My voice flat. The house felt empty, her lies clear, and I stayed calm. My warehouse job called. Tom needed help, but I worked slow. The toolbox waited, the wrench still, and I thought of next week. The living room had our clock, ticking loud, and I planned to follow her. The truth was out, her mask gone, and I felt a resolve. I stayed alert. That afternoon, she left the room, phone in hand, and I heard, "Next week, yes." The house was still, her voice low, and I leaned closer. My warehouse shift loomed, but I ignored it. The toolbox sat, the sink dry, and I decided to act. She came back, smiling, "Busy day?" And I said, "Yeah." My mind set. The living room was warm, her act back, and I watched her. The house felt like a stage, her secret big, and I stayed quiet. The kitchen was clean, the past shifting, and I prepared for what's next. For days after hearing Laura's call, she told me her plan. That morning, I was at the kitchen table, eating toast, when she said, "I'm going out with the girls tonight, staying at a friend's." I nodded. "Okay," my voice flat, and watched her smile. The house felt tense, her lie obvious, and I stayed calm. My warehouse job started soon, but I lingered, sipping coffee. She packed a bag, humming, and I thought of her no strings talk. The living room had our photos, her fake grin, and I saw through it. The toolbox sat on the counter, the wrench ready, and I decided to follow her. I got ready to track her. That afternoon, I checked my truck, gas full, phone charged, and told Tom at the warehouse, "Might be late." He nodded trouble, and I said, "Maybe," keeping it vague. The house was quiet, Laura getting dressed, and I grabbed my jacket. My warehouse shift ended early. I clocked out, the truck rumbling, and I parked down the street. She left, waving, "See you tomorrow," and I waited, engine off. The toolbox stayed home, the sink quiet, and I felt focused. The living room was still, her bag gone, and I prepared to move. She drove off. That evening, I saw her car pull out, her friend's car following, and I tailed them, lights low. The house faded behind, the road dark, and I kept distance. My warehouse job was done, Tom handled night shift, and I focused on her. She turned into a neighborhood, unfamiliar streets, and I slowed, watching. The toolbox wasn't needed, the wrench at home, and I stayed quiet. The truck hummed, my phone on, and I noted the route. The house was far, her lie growing, and I felt a resolve. The photos mocked me, her smile a mask, and I drove on. I saw the house. They parked near a big place, lights on, and I pulled over, hiding behind trees. My warehouse job was a memory, Tom texted. All good, and I ignored it. Laura and her friends got out, laughing, and I watched from the truck. The house looked odd, music faint, and I waited. The toolbox stayed home, the sink fixed, and I felt tense. The living room was gone, her act clear, and I stayed still. My phone buzzed, a call from her, and I let it ring. The house ahead loomed, her secret near, and I prepared to see more. I asked around. That night I stepped out, approaching a guy walking by, and asked, "What's that house?" He shrugged, "Some party." and kept going. Another man passed, and I said, "What happens there?" He grinned. Blissful escapes. People hook up, no rules. My stomach dropped. Laura's no strings made sense. The house was bright, doors open, and I stayed back. My warehouse job faded. Tom managed fine, and I focused on her. The toolbox was home, the wrench in use, and I felt sick. The truck waited, my phone silent, and I decided to prove it. I took a position. I moved closer, hiding behind a bush, and saw Laura at the door with her friends. My warehouse shift was over. Tom handled orders, and I ignored calls. The house pulsed with noise, people inside, and I pulled out my phone. The toolbox stayed home, the sink dry, and I snapped a photo, her standing there, smiling. The living room was far, her lie exposed, and I stayed quiet. My truck was ready, the engine cool, and I felt evidence in hand. The house ahead was her truth, and I planned my next move. I thought about her words. 7 years, her "I love you," all fake. Now this? The house glowed, her friends laughing, and I clenched my phone. My warehouse job held steady. Paycheck's good, but her betrayal stung. The toolbox was home, the wrench still, and I felt betrayed. The living room mocked me, her photos lies, and I stayed hidden. My truck sat, the road quiet, and I decided to act. The house was her secret, her next week real, and I drove off, mindset. The photos faded, her mask on, and I prepared to end it. I drove to plan. That night, I parked far, the truck still, and called Tom. He said, "What's up?" And I said, "Big trouble." Hanging up, the house was behind. Her image burned, and I thought of Mom. Her parents would care. My warehouse job was done, Tom covered, and I headed home. The toolbox waited, the sink fixed, and I sat with a soda, the photo clear. The living room was quiet, her lie huge, and I decided to tell her folks. The truck rumbled, my phone off, and I felt a cold resolve. The house was mine, her truth out, and I prepared to move. I watched Laura and her friends at that house, and the truth hit hard. That night, I stayed hidden behind the trees, the truck parked, and saw 3 guys and 2 girls meet them at the door. The house was lit up, music playing, and I felt sick. My warehouse job was over. Tom handled the shift, and I ignored my phone. Laura laughed, walking in, and I snapped another photo, my hand steady. The toolbox was home, the wrench in used, and I stayed quiet. The living room was far, her lie huge, and I knew what was happening. The truck sat still, the road dark, and I waited for more. I asked about the place. A guy walked by, and I stepped out, saying, "What's going on there?" He looked at me, "Just a party," and kept walking. Another man passed, older, and I asked, "What kind of place is that?" He smirked, "Blissful escapes. People go there to hook up, no rules." My stomach turned. Laura's no strings talk made sense. The house glowed, doors open, and I stepped back, phone in hand. My warehouse job faded, Tom texted, "All good." And I ignored it. The toolbox stayed home, the sink fixed, and I felt betrayed. The truck waited, my mind racing, and I had proof. I saw her go in. Laura and her friends entered, the group laughing, and I zoomed my camera, catching her face. The house pulsed with noise, people moving inside, and I stayed hidden. My warehouse job was done, Tom managed fine, and I focused on her. The toolbox was back home, the wrench still, and I felt cold. The living room mocked me, her photos lies, and I saved the pictures. The truck sat, the engine off, and I decided to act. The house was her secret, her next week early, and I drove off, heart pounding. The road was quiet, her betrayal clear, and I planned ahead. I thought about her words. 7 years, her "I love you," all fake. Now this? The house faded behind, her image burned, and I clenched my phone. My warehouse job held steady. Paycheck's good, but her action stung. The toolbox was home, the wrench in use, and I felt used. The living room had our couch, picked by me, and I doubted it now. The truck rumbled, my mind set, and I headed home. The house waited, her lie exposed, and I sat with a soda, the photos on my phone. The yard was still, the past shifting, and I knew what to do. I called Tom. That night, I pulled over, the truck quiet, and dialed him. He answered, "What's up?" And I said, "She's cheating, got proof." He paused, serious, and I said, "Yeah," my voice flat. My warehouse job was over, Tom covered, and I drove on. The house loomed ahead, her absence loud, and I parked. The toolbox sat inside, the sink dry, and I felt resolve. The living room was still, her photos mocking, and I planned to tell her parents. The truck sat, the road empty, and I saved the evidence. The house was mine, her secret out, and I prepared to move. I thought of her family. Her parents were strict, religious, always pushing loyalty. Mom and Dad would hate this. The house was quiet, the fridge humming, and I sat with my phone. My warehouse job faded. Tom handled the night, and I focused on them. The toolbox waited, the wrench still, and I decided to go. The living room had our clock ticking loud, and I grabbed my keys. The truck rumbled, my mind clear, and I drove to their place. The house behind faded, her lie huge, and I felt a cold calm. The photos were lies, her mask on, and I prepared to end it. I arrived at their home. That late night, I knocked, the door creaking open, and Mom answered. I said, "I need to talk," and she nodded, calling Dad. The house was warm, their living room neat, and I showed the photos. My warehouse job was done, Tom managed, and I explained, "Laura's cheating. I'm filing for divorce." The toolbox was home, the wrench unused, and I stayed firm. The living room was still, their faces shocked, and Dad said, "We're done with her." The truck waited, the road dark, and I felt support. The house was theirs, her shame clear, and I moved forward. I left their place. They sat, heads down, and Mom said, "We're sorry," her voice low. My warehouse job held, Tom texted, "Shift okay," and I ignored it. The house was behind, their decision firm, and I drove home. The toolbox sat, the sink quiet, and I felt lighter. The living room waited, her photos to remove, and I planned the next step. The truck rumbled, my phone off, and I thought of the end. The house was mine, her lie exposed, and I sat with the water, the photos safe. The yard was still, the past over, and I prepared to confront her. I drove to Laura's parents' house that night, the photos burning in my pocket. The truck rumbled, the road dark, and I felt a cold focus. I knocked on their door, and Mom opened it, her face tired. I said, "I need to show you something," and she called Dad, stepping aside. The house was warm, their living room neat, and I sat on the couch. My warehouse job was done, Tom handled the shift, and I ignored my phone. The toolbox was home, the wrench still, and I pulled out the pictures. The living room went silent, their eyes on the screen, and I waited. I explained it all. I said, "Laura's cheating. I followed her to a hookup place." Mom gasped, hands to her mouth, and Dad frowned, leaning forward. The house felt heavy, their faith in her shaking, and I showed the photos. Laura at the door, smiling. My warehouse job faded, Tom texted, "All good," and I stayed firm. The toolbox sat home, the sink quiet, and I said, "I'm filing for divorce." The living room was still, their faces shocked, and Mom whispered, "Our girl?" The truck waited outside, the road empty, and I felt their support. The photos were proof, her lie clear, and I stayed calm. They reacted quietly. Dad said, "We raised her better," his voice low, and Mom nodded, tears in her eyes. The house was warm, the clock ticking, and I sat, waiting. They were strict, religious, always pushing loyalty, and this broke them. My warehouse job held, paycheck steady, but I focused here. The toolbox was home, the wrench unused, and Dad said, "We understand your choice." The living room felt tense, their shame thick, and Mom added, "We're done with her." The truck sat still, the night quiet, and I felt relief. The photos stayed on the table, her secret out, and I listened. They thanked me. Mom said, "Thanks for being honest," her voice soft, and Dad nodded. We needed to know. The house was still, the fridge humming, and I put the phone away. My warehouse job was over. Tom managed fine, and I stayed seated. The toolbox waited home, the sink fixed, and they looked at the photos again. The living room was warm, their decision firm, and Dad said, "She's on her own." The truck rumbled outside, the road dark, and I felt supported. The photos were evidence, her mask on, and I prepared to leave. The house was theirs, her shame theirs, and I stayed calm. I thought about their faith. They'd preached loyalty, family values, and Laura threw it away. The house felt heavy, the clock loud, and I sat with them. My warehouse job faded. Tom handled the night, and I focused on their words. The toolbox was home, the wrench still, and Mom said, "We're sorry." The living room was quiet, their heads down, and I nodded, "It's okay." The truck waited, the road empty, and I felt their pain. The photos lay there, her betrayal clear, and I stood to go. The house was warm, their support real, and I planned my next step. I left with their blessing. That late night, Dad said, "Do what you need," and Mom hugged me, quick. The house was still, the door creaking, and I stepped out. My warehouse job was done, Tom covered, and I drove home, the truck steady. The toolbox sat inside, the sink dry, and I thought of their choice. The living room was far, her photos to remove, and I felt lighter. The truck rumbled, my phone off, and I parked at home. The house waited, her absence loud, and I sat with a soda, the photos safe. The yard was still, their stance firm, and I prepared to end it. I reflected on their reaction. 7 years, and they lost her too, her choice, not mine. The house was quiet, the fridge humming, and I sat with my thoughts. My warehouse job held. Paycheck's good, but her family was done. The toolbox waited, the wrench unused, and I felt free. The living room mocked me, her lies clear, and I planned to confront her. The truck sat, the road dark, and I saved the photos. The house was mine, their support strong, and I stayed calm. The yard was empty, the past shifting, and I knew the end was near. I talked to Tom. The next morning, I drove to the warehouse, unloading boxes, and said, "Her parents are out." He nodded, tough break, and I said, "Yeah, focusing on work." The house waited, her return soon, and I worked late, balancing books. My warehouse job thrived, orders rolling in, and I stayed busy. The toolbox was home, the sink quiet, and I felt ready. The living room was still, her photos to go, and I planned my move. The truck rumbled, my phone on, and I drove home. The house was mine, their stand set, and I prepared for the next day. Laura came back the next day, and I was ready to face her. That morning, I sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, the photos on my phone. The house was quiet, her absence from last night heavy, and I waited. My warehouse job started soon, but I stayed home. The truck parked. She walked in, smiling, her bag over her shoulder, and said, "Had fun with the girls?" I nodded. Good. My voice flat, and watched her unpack. The toolbox sat on the counter, the wrench still, and I felt a cold resolve. The living room had our photos, her fake grin, and I knew the truth. I confronted her. That afternoon, I said, "You don't need to lie," and she froze, bag in hand. The house felt tense, her smile fading, and I pulled out my phone. I showed the photos, her at the house, the guys, the girls, and said, "I followed you." Her eyes widened. "What?" "No," and I stayed calm. My warehouse job loomed. Tom handled the shift, but I ignored it. The toolbox waited, the sink quiet, and I said, "I'm filing for divorce." The living room went still, her face pale, and she dropped the bag. The truck sat outside, the road empty, and I felt in control. The photos were proof, her lie exposed. She tried to explain. She said, "It's not what you think." Her voice shaky, and I shook my head. I saw it. The house was warm, the fridge humming, and she stepped back. My warehouse job faded. Tom texted, "All good," and I stayed firm. The toolbox sat home, the wrench in use, and she said, "It was just a party." I pointed to the picture. "With hookups?" The living room was quiet, her excuse weak, and she cried, "I didn't mean it." The truck waited. The night passed, and I felt done. The photo stayed on, her mask on, and I prepared to end it. I set the terms. I said, "You're leaving, no house, no car, no parents." Her face changed. "What about mom and dad?" And I nodded. I told them. The house felt light, her shock clear, and she yelled, "You had no right." My warehouse job held, paycheck steady, but I focused here. The toolbox was home, the sink dry, and I said, "They're done with you." The living room was still, her tears falling, and she grabbed her bag. The truck sat outside, the road quiet, and I felt relief. The photos were evidence, her lie over, and I stayed calm. She reacted hard. She said, "You're a monster," her voice loud, and I shook my head. 7 years of lies. The house was tense, the clock ticking, and she paced. My warehouse job was done. Tom managed fine, and I watched her. The toolbox waited, the wrench still, and she cried, "I'll fight this." I said, "Go ahead," my tone flat. The living room was warm, her anger fading, and she stopped. The truck rumbled outside, the past heavy, and I felt solid. The photos lay on the table, her secret out, and I prepared to move. I thought about the night. She came home happy, relaxed, and I knew why. Those guys at house. The house was quiet, the fridge still, and I sat with my soda. My warehouse job thrived. Orders rolling in, but her betrayal stung. The toolbox sat home, the wrench unused, and I remembered her smile. The living room mocked me, her photos lies, and I stayed calm. The truck waited, the road dark, and I thought of her parents' shame. The house was mine, her return a flop, and I felt free. The photos were safe, her mask off, and I planned ahead. I checked her stuff. That evening, I watched her pack, clothes scattered, and said, "Take it all." The house felt empty, her presence weak, and she glared. My warehouse job was over, Tom covered, and I stayed home. The toolbox waited, the sink quiet, and she grabbed a jacket. The living room was still, her photos to remove, and I pointed to the door. The truck sat outside, the road ready, and she left, slamming it. The house was light, her weight gone, and I sat with the water. The yard was still, the past over, and I prepared to move on. I talked to Tom. The next morning, I drove to the warehouse, unloading boxes, and said, "She's out." He nodded, "Good call," and I said, "Yeah, focusing on work." The house waited, her absence clear, and I worked late, balancing books. My warehouse job held profits up, and I stayed busy. The toolbox was home, the sink dry, and I felt ready. The living room was quiet, her photos gone, and I planned my next step. The truck rumbled, my phone on, and I drove home. The house was mine. Her return ended, and I stayed calm. Laura's face changed when I told her about her parents, and I knew it was over. That morning, I sat at the kitchen table, the photos on my phone, waiting for her reaction. She stood by the door, bag in hand, and said, "You told Mom and Dad?" Her voice shook, and I nodded. They know everything. The house felt light, her shot clear, and I stayed calm. My warehouse job started soon, but I stayed home. The truck parked. The toolbox sat on the counter, the wrench still, and she turned pale. The living room had our photos, her fake smile, and I watched her crumble. She lashed out. She yelled, "You're a terrible person," her hands trembling, and I shook my head. 7 years of lies. The house was tense, the clock ticking, and she paced. My warehouse job loomed. Tom handled the shift, but I ignored it. The toolbox waited, the sink quiet, and she said, "How could you?" I said, "They deserve the truth." My voice flat. The living room went still, her tears falling, and she grabbed her bag tighter. The truck sat outside, the road empty, and I felt solid. The photos were proof, her mask off, and I prepared to move. She tried to argue. She said, "It was a mistake," her voice breaking, and I pointed to the pictures. "I saw you." The house felt warm, the fridge humming, and she stepped back. My warehouse job faded. Tom texted, "All good," and I stayed firm. The toolbox sat home, the wrench in use, and she cried, "I didn't mean it." I said, "You planned it," showing the date. The living room was quiet, her excuse weak, and she sank to the couch. The truck waited. The night passed, and I felt done. The photos lay on the table, her lie exposed, and I stayed calm. I held my ground. I said, "You're leaving no house, no car, no family," and her eyes widened. The house was still, her shock growing, and she whispered, "They won't talk to me?" I nodded. "They're done." My warehouse job held, paycheck steady, but I focused here. The toolbox was home, the sink dry, and she stared, silent. The living room mocked me, her photos to remove, and she said, "You ruined me." The truck sat outside, the road quiet, and I said, "You did that." The photos were evidence, her mask fallen, and I prepared to end it. She packed fast. That afternoon, she grabbed clothes, stuffing in her bag, and I watched. The house felt empty, her presence fading, and she glared. My warehouse job was done. Tom managed fine, and I stayed home. The toolbox waited, the wrench still, and she took a jacket. The living room was still, her photos to toss, and I pointed to the door. The truck rumbled outside, the past heavy, and she left, slamming it. The house was light, her weight gone, and I sat with a soda. The yard was still, the end near, and I felt relief. I thought about her fall. 7 years, her "I love you," all fake. Now her parents turned too. The house was quiet, the fridge humming, and I sat with my phone. My warehouse job thrived. Orders rolling in, but her betrayal stung. The toolbox sat home, the wrench unused, and I remembered her smile. The living room had our couch, picked by me, and I doubted it now. The truck waited, the road dark, and I thought of her shame. The house was mine, her mask off, and I felt free. The photos were safe, her lie over, and I planned ahead. I cleaned up. That evening, I took her photos off the wall, the frames empty, and threw them out. The house felt clean, her trace gone, and I worked late. My warehouse job was solid, Tom covered, and I balanced books. The toolbox waited, the sink quiet, and I swept the floor. The living room was bare, her presence erased, and I sat with the water. The truck sat outside, the road still, and I felt a new start. The yard was empty, the past done, and I stayed calm. The house was mine, her fall complete, and I prepared to move on. I talked to Tom. The next morning, I drove to the warehouse, unloading boxes, and said, "She's gone." He nodded, smart move, and I said, "Had to," focusing on work. The house waited, her absence clear, and I worked late, counting profits. My warehouse job held profits up, and I stayed busy. The toolbox was home, the sink dry, and I felt ready. The living room was quiet, the walls bare, and I planned my next step. The truck rumbled, my phone on, and I drove home. The house was mine, her mask fallen, and I stayed cool. Laura left after our talk, but her calls started soon after. That afternoon, my phone buzzed, her number flashing, and she yelled, "You can't do this." I stayed quiet, letting her rant, and hung up. The house felt empty, her absence clear, and I sat at the kitchen table. My warehouse job started soon, but I ignored it. The truck parked. The toolbox sat on the counter, the wrench still, and she called again, "Let's talk." I turned off the phone, the photos safe. The living room was bare, her photos gone, and I felt calm. The yard was still, the past over, and I waited. She kept trying. That evening she texted, "Please, it was a mistake," and called from another number, "Don't ignore me." The house was quiet, the fridge humming, and I sat with soda. My warehouse job loomed. Tom handled the shift, but I stayed home. The toolbox waited, the sink dry, and she left a voicemail. I'll fix it. I deleted it. The photos on my phone. The living room was still, her act broken, and I stayed firm. The truck sat outside, the road empty, and I felt done. The yard was quiet, her pleas weak, and I prepared to move. She showed up again. The next morning, she banged on the door, shouting, "Let me in." I opened it, standing firm, and she said, "This isn't fair." The house felt tense, her face red, and I shook my head. My warehouse job was done. Tom managed fine, and I stayed home. The toolbox sat on the counter, the wrench in use, and she cried, "I didn't mean it." I said, "I saw the proof," showing the photos. The living room was bare, her photos gone, and she sank to the step. The truck waited, the road still, and I felt solid. The yard was empty, her mask off, and I stayed calm. She threatened me. She said, "I'll tell people about you," her voice loud, and I nodded. "Go ahead." The house was warm, the clock ticking, and she paced. My warehouse job held, paycheck steady, but I focused here. The toolbox was home, the sink quiet, and she yelled, "You'll regret this." I said, "Doubt it," my tone flat. The living room was still, her threats empty, and she stopped. The truck sat outside, the past heavy, and I felt in control. The photos were safe, her lie exposed, and I prepared to end it. I held my line. That afternoon, she called again, "Give me another chance." And I hung up, blocking her. The house felt light, her voice gone, and I sat with water. My warehouse job thrived, Tom covered, and I worked late balancing books. The toolbox waited, the wrench still, and she texted, "I'm sorry." I ignored it. The photos clear. The living room was quiet, her presence erased, and I stayed calm. The truck rumbled outside, the road dark, and I felt free. The yard was still, her act broken, and I planned ahead. I thought about her fall. 7 years, her "I love you," all fake. Now her family turned too. The house was silent, the fridge humming, and I sat with my phone. My warehouse job was solid, orders rolling in, but her betrayal stung. The toolbox sat home, the wrench in use, and I remembered her smile. The living room had our couch, picked by me, and I doubted it now. The truck waited, the road quiet, and I thought of her shame. The house was mine, her mask off, and I felt relief. The photos were evidence, her pleas ignored, and I stayed cool. I checked the silence. That evening, no calls, no knocks, and I walked the house. The house felt clean, her trace gone, and I threw out her last scarf. My warehouse job was done. Tom managed, and I sat with a sandwich. The toolbox waited, the sink dry, and I felt a new start. The living room was bare, her photos removed, and I planned my next move. The truck sat outside, the road still, and I stayed calm. The yard was empty, the past done, and I saved the photos. The house was mine, her act broken, and I prepared to move on. I talked to Tom. The next day, I drove to the warehouse, unloading boxes, and said, "She's done calling." He nodded, "Good riddance," and I said, "Yeah," focusing on work. The house waited, her silence clear, and I worked late, counting profits. My warehouse job held, profits up, and I stayed busy. The toolbox was home, the sink quiet, and I felt ready. The living room was still, the walls clean, and I planned ahead. The truck rumbled, my phone on, and I drove home. The house was mine, her broken act over, and I stayed cool. Laura stopped contacting me, and the house felt different. That morning, I walked in, the door quiet, no knocks or calls. The house was clean, her things gone, and I sat at the kitchen table with coffee. My warehouse job started soon, but I lingered, the truck parked. The toolbox sat on the counter, the wrench still, and I felt free. The living room was bare, her photos removed, and I thought of the end. The yard was still, the past over, and I started to move on. The lesson was clear, and I felt at peace. I got back to normal. That afternoon, I cleaned the shelves, her scarf tossed out, and opened the windows. The house felt fresh, her trace gone, and I worked late. My warehouse job was busy. Tom handled a rush, and I drove there, the truck steady. He said, "She's out," and I nodded, "Yeah." The toolbox waited, the sink dry, and I unloaded boxes with him. The living room was quiet, the walls clean, and I felt solid. The truck sat outside, the road empty, and I balanced books. The yard was neat, the betrayal done, and I stayed calm. I reflected on the past. 7 years, her "I love you," all lies, now her family turned too. The house was silent, the fridge humming, and I sat with a soda. My warehouse job thrived, profits up, but her words stung. The toolbox sat home, the wrench unused, and I thought of her smile. The living room had our couch, picked by me, and I saw it clear. The truck waited, the road dark, and I learned something big. The yard was empty, the photos gone, and I knew quiet moves beat loud fights. The house was mine, the lesson learned, and I felt ready. I built a new routine. The next day, I opened the warehouse early, Tom greeting customers. He said, "Fresh start," and I smiled. Yeah. The house waited, the air good, and I worked late, counting cash. My warehouse job held, orders rolling in, and I drove home, the truck rumbling. The toolbox sat home, the sink quiet, and I cooked dinner alone. The living room was still, the walls bare, and I ate in peace. The truck sat outside, the road still, and I felt in control. The yard was neat, the past behind, and I stayed cool. I thought about the future. That evening, I planned warehouse upgrades, new tools to sell. The house was quiet, the windows open, and I sketched ideas. My warehouse job was solid. Tom managed well, and I worked late. The toolbox waited, the wrench still, and I felt light. The living room was empty, the couch mine, and I saved money for changes. The truck rumbled, the road dark, and I talked to Tom. He said, "What's next?" And I said, "Growth." The yard was still, the betrayal of memory, and I prepared ahead. I tied up loose ends. The next morning, I checked the divorce papers, signed and ready. The house felt clean, no reminders, and I drove to the lawyer. My warehouse job was busy. Tom handled a rush, and I filed them, the truck steady. The toolbox sat home, the sink dry, and I felt done. The living room was quiet, the past erased, and I paid the fee. The truck sat outside, the road clear, and I headed back. The house was mine, the papers sent, and I sat with a sandwich. The yard was empty, the end firm, and I stayed calm. I talked to Mom and Dad. That afternoon, I visited them, the truck rumbling, and they hugged me. Mom said, "We're proud," and Dad nodded, "You did right." The house was warm, their support real, and I stayed a while. My warehouse job held, profit steady, and I drove home. The toolbox waited, the sink quiet, and I felt backed. The living room was still, the walls clean, and I thanked them. The truck sat, the road quiet, and I parked. The house was mine, their love strong, and I prepared to move on. I felt a change. That evening, I walked the house. No noise, no lies. The house was light, the windows open, and I sat with water. My warehouse job thrived, customers loyal, and I worked late planning. The toolbox sat home, the wrench still, and I felt a new start. The living room was bare, the couch mine, and I thought of trust. The truck waited, the road dark, and I knew the lesson. The yard was neat, the past gone, and I stayed cool. The house was mine, the truth won, and I looked ahead.